Why hello there, and welcome back to Tabletop Ferox. And in this episode, I'm going to be spinning bird kicking open the pages of Street Fighter: The Storytelling Game. Quite possibly the most off-brand thing ever published by White Wolf. Yes, that White Wolf. And aside from being published by the angsty vampire game company, it is still a weird thing on its own. Because, you know, tabletop role-playing games based on video games aren't exactly unheard of, but ones based on fighting games kinda are. Like, this is the only tabletop role-playing game officially based on a fighting game that I am aware of. Incidentally, there is also only one fighting game based on a tabletop role-playing game that I am aware of. Also, this might be the first tabletop role-playing game based on a video game that is unfortunately a thing that is difficult to research, so I can't really be sure. Like, I couldn't find any earlier ones, but also, it seems like the sort of thing that there would have been at least one in the 20 years prior to 1994. And also, before I get into this, I would like to provide a little bit of historic context here, because I am reviewing this game at a point where there are dozens of Street Fighter games. And Street Fighter lore has been expanded greatly by lots of media outside of the games. However, in 1994, when this game came out, the only Street Fighter games were the original and like 5 versions of Street Fighter 2. So that was all that they had on which to base this game. And you know, that did lead to some decisions being made. But before we can get to street fighting, we need to make ourselves a Street Fighter. Street Fighter: The Storytelling Game uses White Wolf's storyteller system, as do most games from White Wolf. So if you have seen any of my World of Darkness videos, this is about to start sounding really familiar. The first step in character creation is coming up with our character concept, as well as choosing their fighting style. However, I am going to hold off on those for right now, for reasons related to the dramatic presentation of information, and just move on ahead to attributes. We have 3 physical, 3 social, and 3 mental attributes, all of which start at 1, and we must prioritize those categories. So obviously, physical first, then mental and social, getting 7, 5, and 3 points respectively to add to each category. So let's go ahead and put 3 points in dexterity, and 2 in strength and stamina, then 2 in intelligence and perception, and 1 in wits, and 2 in manipulation, and 1 in appearance. And next, we have abilities. 5 of each in the categories of talents, skills, and knowledges, which once again must be prioritized. And let's go talents, knowledges, and skills, getting 9, 7, and 4 points respectively to allocate in each category up to a maximum of 3. So let's put 2 points each in alertness, interrogation, intimidation, and insight, and 1 in subterfuge. Then 3 in computers and style lore, and 1 in medicine, and 2 in blind fighting and security. But now on to advantages. We get 5 points for backgrounds, but the options here are a bit less than thrilling, so why don't we break a bit from the way I usually do things and use an additional sourcebook? Because I feel like that is going to give you a much better overall idea of some of the unique aspects of this game. So let's pull out the Player's Guide, which adds some new background options. Specifically, animal hybrids, cybernetics, and elementals. You know, just like in Street Fighter. And you know what, let's just go ahead and take 4 levels of cybernetics. And each of those levels represents 1 cybernetic body part we have, so let's say both arms, 1 leg, and head. cybernetic head is a specifically listed option. And of course, being a cyborg does have some effects on our character. First, it reduces our starting social attribute points by 1, so I guess let's just say goodbye to that 1 point we put in appearance, since we have a robot head now. It also increases the cost of increasing social attributes with experience points by 50%, but also removes the additional cost of increasing physical and mental attributes above 5. So, for example, increasing our manipulation from 3 to 4 would cost 18 experience points instead of 12, but increasing our strength from 5 to 6 would only cost 20 points instead of the normal 30. We also get 1 free rank in computers, interrogation, and medicine, and 2 in intimidation, as robot parts are pretty intimidating. But we cannot start with more than 2 in streetwise or investigation. I guess cyborgs just don't know the ways of the streets. And there is some more stuff, but I will get to that stuff when it comes up. And for our 1 remaining background point, let's take staff and say that we have a technician who helps maintain our cybernetics. Then we get 8 points for basic techniques, and those are punch, kick, block, grab, athletics, and focus. Focus being the one that you use for Hadoukens and such. So let's put 3 in punch, 2 in kick and athletics, and 1 in block. And now is probably a good time to select our fighting style, because it's the point at which we need to do so to continue. And I think for this character, the best option is going to be Special Forces training, because that is kind of a good shortcut in explaining why they are science has gone too far. Then we get 7 points to purchase special maneuvers, and our style provides a list of these special maneuvers which are available to us. Or more so, a list of those that are available to us at a reduced price. So, for example, the Special Forces training style lists foot sweep at 1 point, and if we pull up that maneuver, see that it has a prerequisite of 2 dots in kick and costs 1 point for Shotokan Karate, Special Forces, or Sumo, and then 2 points for any other style. So, with our Special Forces training, it only costs us 1 point to take this maneuver, but a character of any style not listed could still take it at that higher 2-point cost. Then let's take Triple Strike, which was not on our style list, but as you can see is just 2 points for any style. And now, let's go look at the focus maneuvers, which are the extra special moves, things like Sonic Boom, Regeneration, or Extendable Limbs, which has a prerequisite of 4 dots in focus and is only available to Kabaddi style fighters for 4 points. So, obviously, with 0 points in focus and Special Forces style, we cannot take this maneuver. Unless we can. The big advantage to cybernetics is that it lets us substitute cybernetics for focus for the purpose of focus maneuvers, as well as letting us learn any focus maneuver regardless of style, as long as there are no additional requirements beyond focus and style that we do not meet. Which also means that we can get focus powers without allocating any technique points to focus. And there are a few additional details, but for now, the important thing is we absolutely can take this maneuver, and will. And now, Renown, we get 3 points to distribute between Honor and Glory, except that as a cyborg, we start with -2 Honor, because the other fighters think it's unfair that we get to have metal hands, and they don't. So let's just put all 3 of our points into Honor, because it is an important attribute, and starting at 1 is a lot better than starting at -2. Then Chi and Willpower, which are set by our style, 1 and 6 respectively for Special Forces training, and then all characters start with 10 health levels, unless they are a super awesome cyborg, in which case it's 12. Then we get 15 freebie points to spend on various things at various costs, which is unfortunately 1 point shy of enough to learn Sonic Boom. So let's spend 4 freebie points on a power point to buy Jump. Yes, you have to buy the ability to jump, and then another for a combo attack. and basically that just lets us specify 2 attacks and get a bonus when using them consecutively. So let's just go with a simple jab to fierce punch combo. Then let's spend 5 points on 1 more strength, and our last 2 points let's spend on chi. We can't really do anything with it yet, but with access to most of the focus maneuvers, we definitely will in the future. And this character is done. So that was character creation, and basically it is the same as in any other storytelling game. You know, you've got style instead of clan, techniques and maneuvers instead of disciplines, and chi instead of blood points. Although, I do have one very specific complaint here, and that is the way in which the styles are presented. Because each style is presented along with 1 or 2 characters from Street Fighter who practice that style. Which I guess can help provide a very abstract example of a character that uses that style, as the actual stats provided for the characters are significantly overpowered. But it also means that they only provide the fighting styles used by characters in the game. So while you do get Shotokan Karate, Kung Fu, Sumo, and so on, you do not get Taekwondo, Judo, Jiu-Jitsu, Aikido, or any of the other martial arts that are far more common than Capoeira and Kabaddi, which I'm not sure if that one is even a martial art. Also, were those ever officially listed as Blanca and Dhalsim's styles? Because that's what they're listed as in this book. And it does kind of end up feeling like you're being given the tools to make a less powerful clone of a Street Fighter 2 character instead of making your own unique character. And you may recall me saying that there were 10 or 11 styles, and that is because in the styles section of the book, there are 10 styles. And it also states that other styles, like boxing or kickboxing specifically, would be included in future books. But here's the thing, boxing is in this book. Basically, at the end of the book, in the appendix, there is an introductory adventure, which happens to feature M. Balrogson. And like any other character, he is presented along with his fighting style, as well as a few additional maneuvers in the appendix at the end of the book. And these are not like maneuvers that are exclusive to the boxing style or anything, all of them are included in at least 1 other style. And if you look at the right section of the book, it will tell you that the boxing style and a handful of maneuvers are detailed in Appendix 1. But then if you look in, as I mentioned, the wrong part of the book, it will tell you that they are not. And of the 3 other styles that use those maneuvers, kickboxing is the only one that actually tells you where to find them. Although, it does direct you to the wrong page number, which is classic White Wolf. Also, 7 isn't really a lot of points for your maneuvers. Like, pretty much any of the iconic moves, Shoryuken, Cannon Drill, Spinning Bird Kick, Sonic Boom, cost 4 or 5 points. So when you're making your character, you really need to choose between like 4 or 5 low-level boring moves, or 1 fancy move, and then maybe 1 or 2 extra. Like, let's say that you did want to make a Dhalsim clone. You could buy extendable limbs and Fireball, and that's your 7 points. Plus, with your very limited number of points, you have to buy things like Leg Sweep, Uppercut, and Jump. Things that pretty much every character in the games can do. So, 3 out of 6 for character creation. Storyteller character creation is, you know, it's fine. But it also kind of feels like fine is what they were going for. It is kind of the minimum to meet the demands of the game's mechanics. A basic reskin that at this point had become more or less standard from White Wolf. As with all storyteller games, Street Fighter the Storytelling Game uses a D10 dice pool system. So, for example, let's say it is round 1 fight, and we want to try and get a read on our opponent. We would roll a number of d10s equal to our ranks in Intelligence plus Style Lore, so 6, with each die that comes up 6 or higher being a success, and each die that comes up 1 canceling a success. And then 2 successes is a moderate success, which should be enough for us to identify that our opponent is a Jiu-Jitsu practitioner, which is focused heavily on grappling, meaning that our best strategy would be to keep our distance. And that is basically it. Attribute or attribute plus ability versus difficulty with number of successes determining the outcome. Fairly simple and effective, which is why White Wolf has used it in like 20 different games. However, if there is one major problem with the storyteller system, it is that it does not handle combat particularly well. Like, that was never the focus. Which is why it seems like such an unusual choice for a Street Fighter game where combat very much would be the focus. Like, fighter is right there in the title. So obviously they had to come up with some kind of solution for that, which they very much did. Characters have 9 basic maneuvers, 3 strengths of punches and kicks, plus block, move, and grab. And each maneuver has modifiers for speed, damage, and move, as do all of our special maneuvers, but they also have some additional rules. So for example, foot sweep is a crouching maneuver, but also does knockdown in addition to damage. Triple strike lets us roll 2 punches and a kick, and then keep the 2 highest damages, and jump lets us jump to avoid attacks, or combine with a basic maneuver to perform an aerial attack. And then we need to fill out combat cards for each of our maneuvers. So let's go ahead and fill one out for Jab. Maneuvers have 3 base stats: Speed, which affects initiative and is equal to our Dexterity, which is 4, with a +2 modifier from the maneuver, so 6 overall. Damage, which affects damage, and is equal to our Strength, which is also 4, plus relevant technique, in this case Punch, which is 3, and a -1 maneuver modifier for 6 overall. And Move, which is how far we can move in the same round as using that maneuver, and is equal to our Athletics, which is 2, and a +0 modifier. And also, since Jab is the first part of our combo, we should probably note that too. Then we do that for all of our other maneuvers, and we are ready to punch people. So let's say that our character has found herself in a 3-way fight with Cammy and Zangief. First, all players choose which maneuver they wish to perform that round and put down the associated combat card. Basically, once you choose your maneuver for the round, you cannot change it, and using the cards lets you keep your maneuver secret while also not allowing you to sneakily change it. And let's go with Jab. Then all players declare the speed of their chosen maneuver, although the other details still remain hidden. So for this round, Cammy has a speed of 7, Cyberhead Sue 6, and Zangief 1. Then round 1, fight. The character with the lowest initiative acts first, which in this case is Zangief, who closes the gap, then reveals his maneuver to be Pile Driver, and expresses intent to use it on Cyberhead Sue. Now, at any point prior to actually rolling the dice, a character's turn can be interrupted by a character with higher initiative. So, not wanting to be pile-driven, we will interrupt Zangief's turn and take ours. Moving 2 spaces away and revealing our Jab, which, since our extendable limbs allow us to make basic attacks at a range equal to our cybernetics ranks, we can use from here. However, at any time, characters can spend 1 willpower to abort their current move and replace it with block or jump. And since there is nobody left to pile drive and he's out of movement, Zangief aborts in favor of blocking. And since block has a +4 speed bonus, that raises his speed to 7, which is higher than ours, meaning he can interrupt our turn and block, which he does, ending his turn and returning to ours. Just a little bit complicated. There is no attack roll, attacks just hit and you roll damage. However, there is soak. So our attack deals 6 damage, which is reduced by Zangief's stamina of 4 and block technique of 3, because he blocked, which reduces the damage to -1. But fortunately there is a minimum of +1. So we roll our 1 damage die and deal 1 health level of damage for each result that comes up 6 or higher, which in this case is none. And if you are familiar with World of Darkness, you will recognize that this is a moderate simplification of the soak system, which just saved us the trouble of rolling 12 dice. And now with everyone else's turn completed, Cammy acts, approaching Zangief and executing a cannon drill. And since she has the highest initiative, nobody can do anything about it. Cannon drill costs 1 willpower to use and deals 7 damage total, reduced by 4 from Zangief's stamina, and rolling the 3 dice for 2 hits. Then the whole thing starts again. This time we'll select Fierce Punch, the second part of our combo, which adds +2 to our speed when used in a round following the first part of our combo. Then once again, characters are put into initiative order, and round 2, fight. Zangief once again goes for the pile driver, this time on Cammy, who of course interrupts with Foot Sweep. For 9 minus 4 equals 5 damage dice, and 3 hits. And since there was at least 1 hit, there is also Knockdown, which results in Zangief losing his action for this round. However, if the knockdown had occurred after he had attacked this round, it would only result in a -2 speed penalty on the next round. And now it is our turn, so let's take a step back and unload our extendable Fierce Punch on Cammy. And it is worth noting that at this exact point, we are considered to occupy each space through which our extendable limbs travel. So if another character was to interrupt this attack, they could target us in any of those hexes. And our attack deals 10 minus 3 equals 7 damage with 4 hits. And because the total hits exceeded her stamina, she is also dizzied for 1 round, losing her next action. Meaning that in round 3 fight, Zangief finally gets to pile drive someone. And that is basically it, and like I said, it is basically their patch for the lackluster combat in the storyteller system. And I actually really like it. It is a weirdly elegant system that manages to factor in a lot of the intricacies of combat. And mind you, if this were a different game, there's a pretty good chance I would be saying that these combat mechanics were overly complicated and cumbersome. However, when it comes to mechanics, the most important thing is that they serve the game that they are in. This is Street Fighter the storytelling game, and these mechanics do kind of feel like Street Fighter. Something that is focused not just around combat, but specifically unarmed one-on-one combat. And when your combat encounters are intended to be small in scale like that, that's when you can really start to dial up the complexity. Like in Street Fighter the video game, you have different types of punches, kicks, and special moves which have different speeds and damage and movement types which affect how they're used. And that translated surprisingly well to the tabletop game. Right down to things like the lack of an attack roll. Like in Street Fighter the video game, if you are in range and you punch someone, missing is not a possibility. Your opponent may block or move out of the way, but those are active defenses on their part. If you are in the right place and you push the button, your punch is going to connect. Also, the system adds a lot to the structure of combat, so any step that can be removed to make things go quicker is a good thing. The initiative system is also really interesting in that it is built around the idea that there is an advantage in going last, as you get to react to what everyone else has done, and also then you get the ability to interrupt. Which I will say, at first does seem like it is incredibly broken in favor of faster characters, but it's really not. Like, yes, you can always interrupt a character with a lower initiative and run away from them when they try to attack you. But when you interrupt, you have to take your entire turn, so you can't move away, make them waste their turn, and then move back and attack them. So while technically you could just keep running away, you would be wasting your turn in addition to theirs. I mean, unless you had like the one ability only available to a single style and cyborgs that lets you make regular attacks from a distance. But even then, there is still the possibility that they would have enough movement to get you after you attack. And it is a system that is very much balanced with damage versus speed and movement. Like, yeah, in our example, Zangief kept having his pile driver interrupted, which makes it seem like a slow grappling character is kinda useless. But that pile driver also did 12 damage with knockdown. That's the thing, grapple maneuvers are slow, but powerful, and/or can be sustained for multiple rounds. Like, yeah, being as slow as they are, characters do have a lot of opportunities to avoid them, but when they actually connect, there are some serious effects. And this one didn't actually come up in the example, but it is something you might be wondering about: ranged attacks. Basically, almost all ranged attacks, including firearms, have a movement of none, often with a speed penalty. So the ability to attack at range, often with a fair bit of damage, is balanced out by literally not being able to move in the same round. And then once again, a higher initiative target could interrupt and block or jump over the projectile or duck behind a wall. But in doing so, they would lose their opportunity to attack you that round. And I feel like that is another distinctive part of this combat system. The fact that you are expected to take damage during a fight. A lot of times you're going to have to take an attack if you want to be able to make an attack. You can't just constantly avoid everything while still attacking. A sort of back and forth damage dealing, which, as I keep saying, is reminiscent of Street Fighter the video game. So, 5 out of 6 for mechanics, but that is pretty much entirely for the combat system. It is really cool and innovative, and it feels like they actually put thought into emulating the feeling of the source material, instead of just like slapping a licensed coat of paint onto their basic system. And as for the non-combat mechanics, I mean, you know, the storyteller system is fine. It's just really clear that their focus was almost entirely on the combat system. However, I will say that as it is very inspired by that one-on-one combat style, the further you move away from that, the more cumbersome it's going to be. Like, trying to use this system for a D&D style encounter with like 4 or 5 players and 12 goblins would be an absolute nightmare. And it seems like White Wolf was also quite fond of this system because they actually adapted it into a sourcebook for World of Darkness. So if you want to use this combat system in your angsty vampire game, you can. For a White Wolf book, this is remarkably concise and to the point, which of course means that they usually only go on a little bit too long. It is only 188 pages, so I guess they didn't really have the room for the style of overwriting that their books tend to be known for. It is, however, subject to White Wolf's normal standard of editing. So there are, of course, references with wrong page numbers, contradictory information in different parts of the book, little inconsistent format things, and other things that are just incomplete or missing. In terms of content, aside from the maneuvers, of which there are around 100, there isn't really that much in the way of player options. And those options are not very exciting, just the sort of thing where you have points to spend on them, so you have to spend those points on something. As I said, it was very clear that the focus was on the combat and not really anything else. And then, of course, as I mentioned, I'm not exactly thrilled with the choice to limit the styles included to those used by Street Fighter II characters, instead of those that people might want to use for their Street Fighter the storytelling game characters. And yeah, the selection of styles was expanded greatly in the additional books, but I am only looking at the core book here, except for when I looked at the player's guide earlier, but I had a very good reason for that. And other than that, as mentioned, there is an introductory adventure with the boxing style and a handful of minions and NPCs. So, no adjustment for writing. It is written fine, and overall the editing is bearable, although you do occasionally have to make a decision about which one of two things the book says is correct. And also no adjustment for content. Once again, it's fine, it gives you the stuff you need, but doesn't really provide much extra. The layout of this book is decent for the 90s, basically just two-column text that flows around anything else on the page. Of course, the big notable thing is these colored page edges, which are color-coded to each chapter, making it possible to navigate the book just from the edge. And also a design feature that I fully admit to stealing from this book. And just overall, a lot of good use of color coding in the layout and text. Also, there's a lot of art here, and the quality of the art is fairly high. However, the art is a thing that I want to discuss. The art here is really inconsistent. Like, let's look at the cover. There's a pretty good reason why no other book in the series had cover art like this. If this doesn't make you feel just a little bit uncomfortable, there's something wrong with you. Then there is a lot of these big splash pages that look like they are official art from Capcom, but then also there's a lot of art that very much looks like it's from White Wolf. And personally, I like the White Wolf style art better, like a lot better, but it does depict some weird things for a Street Fighter game. Like T-Hawk fighting a cyborg alligator man. And this is finally the reason why I brought up the player's guide earlier, to show you the hybrid animal and cyborg rules. Even though the rules for those things are not in the core rulebook, there are definitely things that are represented in the core rulebook and intended to be a part of the game from the beginning. As I brought up earlier, when this game came out, there were exactly 16 Street Fighter characters, and very little lore. So they had to fill in a lot of gaps, and they filled them in with this. And it's kind of like looking into this weird alternate reality where Street Fighter was an edgy 90s comic book. Like, this does not say Street Fighter to me in the least. Whatever this does accurately represent, I am very interested in, but it is definitely not Street Fighter 2. Also, Chainsaw Hand was not an option I could find in either of the books that I used, so that is why the character I made did not have a chainsaw hand. Now, the cynical explanation here would be to say that they looked at what they had, looked at the competition to what they had, and tried to make the one more like the other. But personally, I want to believe that there was some kind of genuine creative intent behind this. That someone over there at White Wolf looked at Blanca and said, yes, this is the future of Street Fighter. Weird dudes. And, I mean, they weren't exactly wrong. So, 4 out of 6 for presentation. It is a fairly standard book from the 90s, but with some really good use of color throughout, and a lot of art, most of which I really like. Although, there is a bit of stylistic whiplash, and as I said, some of it makes me wish I were reviewing the game that it accurately represents, more than the one that I am. And that was Street Fighter: The Storytelling Game. A tabletop role-playing game based on Street Fighter from White Wolf using the same system as Vampire the Masquerade is one of those things that sounds like it should only be notable for the novelty of its existence. Like, it feels like it should be another Dallas the Television role-playing game, the sort of thing where the conversation begins and ends with, hey, this is a thing that exists. But despite all of that, it is actually really good. And I think it gets overlooked a lot because, well, as I just said, it sounds like it's going to be absolutely terrible, but then also, the thing it does really well is incredibly niche. Like, there are video games that you play for story, and video games that you play for gameplay. And of the fairly limited number of video to tabletop adaptations, the ones based on games that you play for story tend to do the best. Like, in general, the goal of most licensed role-playing games from any media is just kind of giving you the tools to have an adventure in the world of that thing. Because just as a genre and form of entertainment, tabletop RPGs do tend to be largely story-based. But Street Fighter had a barely defined world at the time, and a tabletop adaptation that focused on the gameplay of the source material, which makes it a very unique thing, but not one that you think to look for. And even if you did, it's just a thing that really feels like it wouldn't exist. However, being the one game that does what it does, it's also somewhat notable for its continued support through an active fan community. Because, you know, the internet allows for international fan communities to form around obscure role-playing games that only have 5 books released in 1994 and 5 that were never reprinted or officially released digitally. Because that's the thing with licensed games. Once the license is expired, that's it. And after 1995, White Wolf either chose not to continue or was unable to renew terms with Capcom. Although, personally, I kinda wish that they had just filed off the serial numbers and released an edgier version of this game with more of a Mortal Kombat Bloodstorm Ultra Vortec feel to it. You know, the sort of thing that this illustration would accurately represent, and also would never have been approved by Capcom for a Street Fighter game. Or maybe that's just, you know, one of those things that I'm gonna have to do myself. And thank you for watching, with extra special thanks to my Fight and Flail Snails, Randy Mulholland, and Toshiro Crow. If you'd like to be cool like them, check out my Patreon, where you can get early access to videos and fun stuff that I make for the Patreon. But if you don't want to do that, that's cool too. You can still hit all the lovely buttons, like, subscribe, these other videos floating around the screen, which I am sure are lovely videos that you will also enjoy. And I will see you next time.